to give this preparatory talk. So I feel a bit awkward being here because I'm not familiar with most of the material that will happen in future, but I was told that algebraic geometry is important, so I can introduce some basic concepts. So part of my reason for awkwardness is I don't know the background of audience. So I will just, KV of course told me about what to expect. So I have prepared something. So please feel free to stop, ask questions, or if things are very unclear or too clear, you can anytime stop me and, we can discuss if you have any questions. So my goal today and next talk, I have 2 lectures that I'll give, is to introduce basics of algebraic geometry, especially with a view towards the kind of things that will be required in the later lectures. So most of today, I'm going to spend introducing to you the notions of affine varieties. So I hope you can see what I'm writing. So affine varieties,
yeah.
Projective varieties, and morphisms between them. So this is roughly what I want to do. This is probably going to be too much material for today, but I'll try to do as much as possible today. And then in the next talk, I'll complete what I wanted to say, and then maybe talk about some more local properties like singular points and normal points, and especially focus on the kind of examples that of varieties and operations that come up in GCT. But today is supposed to be a basic introduction on all these fundamental concepts. So just to give you a reference, this is something that you can look back, you can refer to. A standard textbook on algebraic geometry is by Robin Hartshorne. So chapter 1, sections 1 to 3 is roughly what I'm doing in today's lecture, or at least today and a little bit of next lecture. So there is a lot in these sections that I'll not cover, but roughly you can use that as a basic reference. So let's start with the first topic, which is affine variety. So this is where I'll spend most of my time, because once we understand affine varieties in detail, the rest for projective varieties, you just need to add a few things. So it's important to understand affine varieties well. Okay, so I'll always work over complex numbers, which I'll denote by C, complex number field, I'll denote by C. And in algebraic geometry, there are 2 sides to the subject, which are present in the name. So there's algebra and there is geometry. So geometry, at least affine geometry, happens in this. So this kind of thing, that this has appeared in Christian's talk earlier this week. He looked at zeros of polynomials in this set. So Cn is just tuples of complex numbers, right? So these are n tuples of complex numbers. Algebraic geometers have a fancy notation for this. We don't want to call this Cn, but we'll call this An with script A. This is what we call affine n space. So you can do this for any field in place of C. We'll stick to C because that's already interesting, I'm told, for what the kind of applications you want to do. One reason for this notation is, of course, it looks nicer, but the other reason is we want to distinguish between Cn and An. Of course, they're same, but Cn is usually a vector space. Our intuition is that this is a vector space. This is more than a vector space. So it is, the point set is the same as this, but as a variety, this is more. Okay, so that is the one side of the game. The other important object is the polynomial ring in n variables. So these are polynomials in n variables that over C. Okay, so that have coefficients from C. Of course, this is something that you want to do, from what I understand from the first lecture. This is important for you. you want to understand polynomials and determinant, permanent, these kind of things. So on the one hand, you have geometry happening in CN, and here we have algebra happening. So algebraic geometry is really an interplay between these two. We will, as we go progress today, I'll try to see how these interact with each other. In algebraic geometry, often we use algebra to study geometry. Okay, so that is an important aspect of algebraic geometry. But it can be the other way, and it's possible that in geometric complexity theory, it's the other way that is happening. You're using geometric, information to conclude something about polynomials. So there is a rich interplay between these two. And the first, basically, the basic key idea is, so given a polynomial, so I'm going to use, instead of writing this polynomial ring like this, I'll just use R to denote it. So given a polynomial f in R, sorry, R being the ring, we can talk about and a point, let's say. So I want to use small p to denote a point. Given a polynomial in R and a point in this, we say that p is a 0 of f. So I'm starting with some very obvious things, but I thought it will be good to set this up. So of course, this is what we mean. P is a 0 of f if this is 0. Okay, and the whole point of studying algebraic geometry is to study zeros of polynomials. Okay, so this is simply saying that because it's a polynomial in n variables, you can plug in ai for xi, and you must have 0. So for example, 1, 1 is a 0 of okay, so that's obviously what I mean. And we are interested in zeros of polynomials. And in fact, more generally, if, so let me just give the definition. If, let's say S be any set, so it's just a set of polynomials, the zero set of S denoted by this is all points in an such that f of p is 0 for all f in S. Okay, this is what we call an algebraic set. Okay, so the definition is that if you have a subset, I mean, this is written indirectly, but it's if you have a subset of an, so that is, in other words, a subset x in an is an algebraic set if there exists S in R such that X is ZS. So this is, by the way, the note ZS is the notation that I want to use. Is the set of all zeros of polynomials in S, common zeros. So every polynomial in your given set S must vanish at that point in order for that point to be in ZS. So this is what is called an algebraic set. Convention varies. We can call this itself an affine variety, but in Hartshorne and in many other books, you need additional condition, some topological condition for that to be a variety. But that for now, let me not focus on that. Okay, so algebraic sets are simply this is covered in Christian's talk earlier, where he talks about zeros of polynomials. And if you remember, he mentions finitely many polynomials. He doesn't, I mean, he requires S to be a finite set. And that is my next remark, that you don't get anything new by allowing infinite sets. Okay, so if I is the ideal in R generated by S, okay, so generated by S, then one has that Z of I is equal to Z of S. Okay, this is of course a very simple exercise, so this is very easy to check. Okay, so key idea being one uses this, and this is something that if you have never seen this, one can use this. So if you have F and G are in R, then and P is in AN. So if you first multiply and evaluate the polynomial at that is same as, okay, so this happens. Okay, so in other words, if you take a set S and look at its zero set, you can actually look at all the elements generated by that set. So I hope everyone knows what ideal is. Okay, so is that fine? Ideal is simply all elements generated by elements of S with elements in R. So you are potentially getting a bigger set I. I mean, not potentially, you do get a bigger set I most of the time, but the zero set, in principle, if you have a bigger set, the zero set is smaller, but for ideals, it doesn't actually increase the zero set, it remains the same. And now another fact here, R is what is called a Noetherian ring. So this means every ideal is finitely generated as an ideal. Okay, so basically, if ZS is an algebraic set, then you can write ZS as Z of F1 through FR for some finitely many. Okay, for obviously it's finitely many. Okay, so this is clear, right? If you any algebraic set, you simply take the ideal generated by that S and look at the generators of that ideal, and you can take this. So this agrees with what Christian defined last time. Okay, so and a quick lemma here. So the first point, I mean, this is just easy to state. Algebraic sets are closed under finite unions and arbitrary intersections. Okay, so they're closed under finite unions and arbitrary intersections. Moreover, the empty set and the full set are algebraic. Okay, so remember, algebraic means it is a zero set of a collection of polynomials, and the proof of this is very easy. So one can just simply observe that if you have something like this is nothing but S1 times S2, where S1 times S2 consists of products of polynomials in S1 and S2. And for two things you have noticed this, so it can be generalized by induction to any finite set of algebraic sets. On the other hand, you have intersection of arbitrary intersections. So alpha is some index with varying in some indexing set. This is actually nothing but the zero set of the union of the S alphas. And if you take the single polynomial, constant polynomial 1, clearly it has no zeros, right? So empty set is the zero set of the constant polynomial. And if you take the zero polynomial, you get everything. Okay, so finite intersections are closed, by which I mean, of course, that if you have finitely many algebraic sets, their union is closed. Finite unions is, the set of algebraic sets is closed under finite union. So if you take finitely many algebraic sets, their union is algebraic. If you take an arbitrary collection of algebraic sets, their intersection is algebraic. Okay, and empty set and the full set are algebraic. So obviously this should remind you. So we conclude algebraic sets, in other words, these are precisely the properties that you expect of closed sets in a topology. So algebraic sets are closed sets in a topology on AN. So this topology is called the Zariski topology on okay. So remember here, this is the Zariski topology where closed sets are zeros of polynomials, so common zeros of a collection of finite collection of polynomials. But we note that An is just as a set is just a Cn, it admits another topology. Of course, this is something that we are more familiar with, right? Better familiar with. So this is the standard, I mean, the Euclidean topology. So the comparison of these two also appeared in Christian's talk. And so basically, it is easy to observe that if you have a collection of zeros of polynomials, because polynomial functions are continuous functions in the usual topology, zeros of polynomials are closed sets in the usual topology. So if Zariski closed implies Euclidean closed, right? So Zariski closed implies Euclidean closed, because Zariski closed means zeros of polynomials. Polynomials being continuous functions in the usual topology, zeros are simply the inverse image of the zero. So 0 is a closed set point in C. So inverse image is closed under a continuous map. So Zariski closed is Euclidean closed. But the converse is not true. This is easy, but converse is not true. Okay, so there are lots of Euclidean closed sets, but that are not Zariski closed. I mean, so you can work with, you can see this if, let's say X is Zariski closed, that means it's an algebraic set. Then X is finite or X is even, right? So this is easy to see. This is the reason is a non-constant polynomial, a non-zero polynomial in one variable has only finitely many roots. So because a non-constant non-zero polynomial has only finitely many zeros, in A1 you only closed sets are finite sets. Of course, A1 is not finite, but that is only infinite closed set. Whereas there are lots of closed sets in C which are not finite and which are not C. So, but in the Euclidean topology, there are many infinite closed sets that are not equal to C. Okay, so there are lots of them. So example, you can take the unit ball. You can take the real line inside inside complex numbers. Okay, so there are lots of such things. Okay, so Zariski closed doesn't, I mean, implies Euclidean closed, but the converse is not. Okay, so let's continue. So I want to now come. So what we have done is we have taken polynomials in the ring, and we have gotten zeros of that. But now I want to take subsets of the affine plane, affine space, and construct some ideals from it. But before that, let me introduce. Okay, so maybe I introduce this definition. If Y is a subset of, so I want to consider all subsets, not just algebraic subsets. So if Y is any subset, then the ideal of y is, I denote it by like I of y, is all polynomials. Again, let me remind you, R is the polynomial ring over C in n variables. So f in R such that f of p is 0 for all p in y. So I take the collection of polynomials which vanish on all of y. Okay, so with this notation, so now I can, yeah, so just to study this, so let x be v of I. So I mean, this is really an discussion. Okay, so let me just, so this is a important theorem in algebraic geometry, fundamental theorem that is used all the time and without even mentioning that we are using it. So this is Hilbert's Nullstellensatz. It's zero set theorem, that is English translation. It says that, okay, so I'll simply write it like this. So let I be an ideal in R. Okay, so let I be an ideal in R. So if f in R vanishes on all of Zi, so if a polynomial vanishes on the zero set of that ideal that we started with, so in general that a polynomial of course need not be in the ideal, but a power of that polynomial will be in the ideal. So it says that then f power R is in I for some integer R. Okay, so is there a question? Okay, so in other, I mean, so in other words, or in said in a different way, you take I of Z of I. So you take Z of I is the collection of points where every polynomial in I vanishes, but then you take all polynomials which vanish on that zero set. So this consists of f in R such that f power R is in I for some R. Okay, so this doesn't quite logically imply this, but one direction of this is implied by this, but this is what the content of the theorem is. This direction is trivial because if f has this property, then clearly f power R will vanish at all points in V of I, because f power R is in I, but this means f will vanish. Okay, because f power R power at evaluated at P is just R fold product of f evaluated at P. Okay, this is how we think of Hilbert's Nullstellensatz, and this is called the radical of I, and denoted by square root of I, because what we are really doing is taking elements of I and taking their roots in some sense. Of course, we are not just taking square roots, but we are taking all roots of elements of I. Okay, so if you take, for example, a simple example here, if you take I of V of I of Z of the polynomial x square or x0 square, you get just x0. So you look at all elements of affine space where x0 square vanishes, but at all such points x0 also vanishes. So the ideal is x0. So this is actually the root of the x0 square. Of course, you can replace x0 square by x0 power any number. Okay, so one corollary of the Nullstellensatz, and this kind of thing I think is important in what some lectures that come later, is if V of I is empty, then I is the unit ideal, or I is R. Okay, so this is because if V of I is empty, by Hilbert's Nullstellensatz, I of V of I is I of empty set. But what are the polynomials which vanish on empty set? That means it is just the one vanishes there. So it generates the ideal. So it is the ideal generated by one. So empty set is nothing. So everything vanishes on empty set. But this is root of I. So that means 1 is in root of I, but that means 1 is in I. Because a power of 1 is in I, but that of course implies that 1 itself is in I. That means I is R. So I should warn you here that this is not true for other fields. So if you take, for example, ideal to be x square plus y square plus 1 inside the polynomial ring over real numbers, V of I is empty, but I is not equal to 1. Okay, so when you want to prove that something is empty, it's not enough to check that the corresponding ideal is the unit ideal. Okay, it is enough in the case of complex numbers, but not in other fields. Okay, so is this clear so far? Please let me know if you have any questions.
I think it's fine.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So now just to give you some more, I mean, most of these are, I'm not going to prove most of these. So far, at least we have not encountered anything significantly that requires some difficult idea, but I'm just listing out some important points. So if x1, so x2 are, let's say, inside an, and x1 is inside x2, then, so these are subsets which one is contained in the other, then the ideals, the inclusion statement in the ideals, inclusion relation reverses. So if x1 is smaller than x2, then I of x1 is bigger than I of x2. And this is really obvious if you think about it for a minute, because this is all polynomials which vanish on x1. This is all polynomials which vanish on x2. I mean, vanishes at every point on x2. But x2 is a bigger set. So if something vanishes on all of x2, it will vanish on x1 because x1 is sitting inside x2. So if something vanishes on all of x2, it will obviously vanish on all of x1. And in the other direction, you have, if I1 is contained in I2, are ideals, then Z of I1 will contain Z of I2. Okay, so if you, what is Z of I1? These are points on which every polynomial in I1 vanishes. Here, these are points where every polynomial in I2 vanishes. But if you have a point where every polynomial in I2 vanishes, I2 contains I1. So at that point, every polynomial in I1 also vanishes. So it is in Z of I1. So this is also a trivial inclusion. So really what I'm leading to, and you can already picture this, you have on the one side subsets of the affine space, on the other side you have ideals. And what I've really done is I've given functions in both directions. Given a subset, I know how to construct an ideal. Given an ideal, I know how to construct a subset of the affine space. And these two functions actually are well behaved in the sense that an inclusion relation in one setup gives you an opposite inclusion in the other setup. But are these functions inverses of each other? Not quite, because if you start with an ideal is an ideal. So if you take first Z of I, but then you take the ideal of that, you don't get I back. By Hilbert-Nullstellan search, you actually get the radical of I back. So you get something bigger than I in general. On the other hand, if you start with a subset, so I'll say a subset is any subset, and you first take the ideal, so you come to the world of ideals, then take the zero set. So you take I of x and then take Z of I of x. So now this is where we have to do a little bit work, but this, if you think about this, certainly will contain X, but it can in principle, in general, contain more elements than X. So this is actually the closure of X in the Zariski topology. So if X were originally an algebraic set, you get X back. Okay, so this is 1, 2, 3 are easy. 1, 2 of course are easy. 3 is the Hilbert-Nilsson sets. 4 can be proved without too much difficulty. So I think I should not spend too much time on this. So proof is, let's say, easy. 1, 2 are trivial. 3 is Hilbert-Nilsson sets. 4 is easy. Okay, so this now gives me the following picture. So upshot of all this is, I'll just draw first a picture. So if you take algebraic sets in AN, and on this side, we don't want to take all ideals. We want a bijective correspondence. So I'm going to take radical ideals. So our radical ideal, as the name suggests, is an ideal whose radical is itself. So an ideal is radical okay, so it is an ideal whose radical is itself. So now if you have X here, sorry, I've been using black and okay, so X here, and we send it to I of X. If you have an ideal here, we send it to Z of I, right? So this is a bijective correspondence. So this is in fact as an inclusion reversing bijective correspondence. Right, so you have algebraic sets. Because of this proposition that I have here, if I'm restricting my attention to radical ideals, if I take I and go to here and then come back, I get root I, but that's equal. So that's identity in one direction. If I restrict my attention to algebraic sets here, if I take X, go to here and then come back, I get X bar, but X being algebraic is already closed. So X bar is equal to X. So that means I get the original set back. So this is, in some sense, what is happening in algebraic geometry. You have algebraic sets, which are the geometric objects that we are interested in, and you have radical ideals. Okay, so and this relation, this correspondence has many more features, but I mean, this is the beginning of this bijection. The first time we observe this. Okay, so now let me just give a definition and also remind you of some different terminology, that notations that people follow. An affine variety is a closed or a Zariski closed of AN. So I will, for the purpose of today's talk, I'll just call an affine variety simply an algebraic set. Right, so it is simply an algebraic set. But the remark I want to make is, many people, including Hartshorne, many authors require affine varieties to be, the reason that they first considered algebraic sets, and So to be irreducible. So I have not introduced this word. This is simply a topological property. So I will say simply that an algebraic set X is called irreducible. By the way, this is a purely topological notion. A topological space is irreducible if it cannot be written as a union of two proper closed subsets. It is irreducible if it cannot be written as a union of two proper closed subsets. Okay, so this is the definition of irreducible algebraic sets, and many people require varieties to be algebraic sets which are irreducible. Okay, so let me just introduce an important terminology because I want to keep using that. So if, okay, so let X be a variety. So I will not demand irreducibility. I'll simply say an affine variety is an algebraic set. If I want to work with irreducible varieties, I'll say irreducible affine variety. So it is a closed subset of some affine space. Let's say AN. Then the coordinate ring. So this is an important player in the subject. Is the quotient ring. So you take the ideal of that variety and you take, you mod the polynomial ring by that. Okay. So this is, let's say I'll denote it by this gamma of X. Okay. Coordinate ring is an important object associated to an affine variety. There is, I'll not write anything, but I'll just orally say that there is some ambiguity in the definition, because an affine variety can sit inside A3, but separately it can also sit inside A15. Okay, so you potentially have one coordinate ring, because this coordinate ring clearly depends on this embedding of X in some AN, but X could be inside AN and it could also be in M for a different M. So there is ambiguity. We would like to think of coordinate ring as an intrinsic object attached to the affine variety, and it is in fact. So it doesn't matter what embedding you take, you get the same ring. As a C algebra, it will be the same thing, but that will, I mean, I need more theory to talk about that. So for now, let me just define coordinate rings with respect to a particular embedding. Okay, so now based on everything that I have covered so far, so if X is irreducible, this means that it cannot be written as a union of two proper closed subsets. This is actually equivalent to saying that the corresponding ideal is prime. So this is actually often a very useful way of checking that something is an irreducible algebraic set. The ideal has to be a prime ideal inside the polynomial ring, which of course is trivially equivalent to the coordinate ring being an integral domain.
Krishna, maybe you just introduce briefly what prime ideals are.
Okay, so
briefly say.
Yeah, sure.
Prime ideals. Yeah.
So I introduced radical ideals. So if an ideal, so this is very much similar to what you know of prime numbers, is prime if, let's say, FG are two polynomials in R whose product is in I, then F is in P or I here, or G is in
I.
Yeah. So is this okay? So if you have a product in the ideal, you want one of them to be in the ideal. So for example, XY, the ideal generated by product XY is not prime. So this is because the product of X and Y is in XY, obviously by definition. So this notation here again, so this is again I don't know what is the background. So this is all multiples of, right? I mean, the ideal generated by xy is this. This is my notation. So this is the ideal generated by f times. This is f into or f multiplied with xy. So then xy is of course xy times 1. So it is there, but you can clearly see that. So neither x nor y is a multiple of xy, because obviously if you multiply anything by xy, you get, you will have to see y in it and x in it. So x and y can't be there. So it's not a prime ideal. Okay. So actually this is a good example, because if you draw the variety of this, you really get this, right? If you think about this, what are the zeros of this polynomial? These are points inside C2 such that A, B is 0. So that means either A is 0 or B is 0. So that means it's the union of x-axis and the y-axis. So clearly this is not irreducible. The picture itself clearly makes that clear, right? Because it is a union of x-axis, which is a proper closed subset, and y-axis, which is another proper closed subset. This is not irreducible, which agrees with my remark here that Ix is not prime. So here you can check actually that Ix is I of this is just xy, because xy is a radical ideal. You can check that is a radical ideal, though it is not prime. It's not a prime ideal, as I commented here, but it is a radical ideal. If a power of a polynomial belongs to xy, that polynomial actually must belong to xy. This requires a little computation, but you can do that. So I of z of xy is just xy. So that's not prime. So this is not irreducible. So for me, this is a perfectly good affine variety. For Hartshorne, this is not an affine variety. It is merely an algebraic set. Okay. So, and of course, this is a purely algebraic fact. So a ring is this, maybe I can also define this. A ring, let's say A, is an integral domain if xy are in A and xy is, the product is 0, then x is 0 or y is 0. Okay, so let me not use xy because that could be confusing. So A, B is 0, then A is 0 or B is 0. Okay, so you in the coordinate ring of this variety here, you have x bar times y bar is 0, but neither x bar nor y bar is 0. Okay, so maybe I should, this is mostly what I wanted to say about affine variety. So let me go to examples, because it's important to understand examples. So I'll try to give you different kinds of examples before moving on to projective varieties. So the first example, I mean, there is the affine space, of course, is an algebraic variety. This is obviously, it is the zero set of the zero polynomial. So this is an affine variety. It is actually also irreducible because the zero ideal in the polynomial ring is a prime ideal. Okay, that's an affine variety. I mean, it's in fact an irreducible affine variety. Okay, so it's little some other interesting examples. So let's take these kind of elements. So this is actually an A3. So I'm taking triples of complex numbers, which are of the form, you take a complex number, you square it, then you cube it. So t comma t squared comma t cubed. So this is just some randomly defined subset of C3. There's no reason a priori to think of this as an algebraic set. Why should there be? Why should there be a collection of polynomials whose zero set is exactly equal to x? So that is a question. So is x algebraic? Okay. So if you think about this, so this seems to be an important question that you want to answer, right? Is something algebraic? You encounter a subset of affine space somehow through your other calculations, and your question is it algebraic? So here you have just seemingly interesting set, but is it algebraic? Being algebraic means there should be a collection of polynomials whose precise zero set is the given set, right? So let's try to investigate this. It is clear that you can immediately see certain polynomials that vanish on x. So there are that polynomials that vanish on x. So you can just staring at it, you know that, for example, so I'm going to use x1, x2, x3 for my variables. That's my standard practice. So you can see that x1 square minus x2 vanishes on this, because if you take x1 square minus x2 on any point of the capital X, it will vanish. Similarly, you can take x1 cubed minus x3, that will also vanish, right? So that also vanishes on all of x. So what is it that we are trying to say? So if you take the ideal I to be the one generated by these two polynomials, so this is of course sitting inside the polynomial ring in three variables. Then in terms of the notation that we have been developing, so on the one hand we have x, on the other hand we have z of I, the zero set of I. So what are the inclusions that we have here? So if something belongs to x, then this polynomial vanishes on it, and this polynomial also vanishes on it. Hence, anything in the entire ideal will vanish on this. So it seems to me that this is clear, right? So anything in x is the zero of all the polynomials in I. On the other hand, if something is a zero of the polynomials of I, so that means okay, so this is trivial, but so suppose A, B, C is in Z of I. What does that mean? That means the first polynomial vanishes on this. That means A square is equal to B. Second polynomial also vanishes on this. That means A cubed is C. That means ABC is in X. Correct? So if you have an element of C3 or A3, which is a zero of everything in Z, it must be in X. So that means you have inequality. So X is algebraic. Okay, so this is how you conclude, in fact, that X is algebraic. So some other things you can do which require a little more work, and you have to do some computations. Actually, I of X is I, because one can check this. This requires some algebra, but I is a prime ideal, one can check. Okay, so this is the first thing you can check. Second thing is the coordinate ring of X, which is by definition Cx1, x2, x3 modulo I, is actually isomorphic to C of x1. Okay, C of x1. Think of it like this: if you have polynomials in x1, x2, x3, you are killing everything in I. That means you are killing this polynomial. That means you're putting x2 equal to x1 square. So that means essentially you're getting rid of x1. You are putting x3 is equal to x1 cubed. That means you're getting rid of x3. So what survives, and x3 is now x1 does not change. So what remains and this is a very loose way of saying this, but what remains is simply a polynomial in X1. So there's an isomorphism of rings. Okay, so we will see later. This is something that we can't prove now. We'll see later that X is isomorphic, whatever that means. As of now, that has no meaning, to just A1. The affine line, even though it is actually given as a algebraic variety in A3, it is actually isomorphic to A1, and it is called a twisted cubic curve. So this is a famous example of algebraic variety. Okay, so third example. So very similar to this. I will not spend too much time on this, but so you can take. So remember, both the previous example and this example are one parameter variety. So there is a single parameter which determines this. Here also there is a single parameter that determines this. So these are, I mean, this will not be isomorphic to A1, but it will be parameterized by one parameter. So this is also an algebraic variety. So this is of course inside A2. And one can check that the ideal is actually, again, it is x1 cubed minus x2 squared. You can see clearly that that vanishes on this, and anything that, any point on which this polynomial vanishes will be of this form. Okay, so there is a subtle difference between y and x. Y is not a, it is not a smooth curve or smooth algebraic variety, or it is a singular algebraic variety. Here x is non-singular or smooth. Okay, so maybe in later I'll explain this more. Okay, so now the next two examples are interesting because they tell you how these things are subtle. I mean, it is, you have to be careful when you work with this. Okay, so let's take this. Okay, so you have A1 minus 0 in A1. So this is like the punctured play, a punctured line. So you just remove the origin. So clearly, actually, X is an open set. Right? So because 0 is a singleton, of course, it is a closed set because it is the, for example, it is this, it is the 0 set of the polynomial X. It is just the 0 element. So this is closed. X being the complement of a closed set is an open set. So it's an open subset of A1. So as such, it is not an affine variety. It's not a closed subset of A1. So it's not an affine variety sitting inside A1, yet it is in fact an affine variety. So I want to illustrate this. Why is this an affine variety? Remember, what is an affine variety? It is an algebraic subset of some affine space. The way it is given to you, it is not an algebraic subset of A1. That doesn't mean that it cannot be an algebraic subset of some other AN. In fact, that is precisely what happens. So X1, X will not, is not an open subset A1 of A1, but it is, sorry, X is not a closed subset of A1, but it is a closed subset of A2. So consider the map from X to A2 given by, so I'll just, X is just the complement of 0. So you have A. So A is a non-zero complex number. I'll send it to A, comma A inverse. Okay. So let's call this map phi. Let phi be the, y be the image of So this simplify x. Okay, so there is a bit, I mean, the first question is y a closed subset? Okay. So is y a closed subset? Y is of course sitting inside A2, right? So I can perfectly reasonably ask, is y a closed subset of A2? Of course it is. Why is that so? Because y is actually the zero set of, right? This is easy to check. So it is, remember, closed. I'm not putting this thing before closed by, not every time I'm saying Zariski closed, but that's all I'm considering today. So closed means Zariski closed. When I ask you is y closed, I mean, is it Zariski closed? In other words, is there a polynomial or is there a collection of polynomials whose zero set is precisely y? And the answer in this case is yes, because if you take x1, x2 minus 1, that is precisely the zero set of, the zero set of that is precisely y. So y is a closed subset of A2, correct? But, and you can actually check that phi is a bijection, right? Because phi, of course, not to A2, it's not a bijection, but to x to y is a bijection. Phi is a bijection, right? Because clearly, if A and B are equal, if A inverse is equal to B inverse, A and B are equal. So it is 1, 1. And any point which is in Y is of the form A inverse, so it is in the image of A. So it is a bijection, but in fact, more than that. Phi is a homeomorphism. Homeomorphism is, it means that it's a continuous map. It admits an inverse, so it's a bijective map, and the inverse is also continuous. Okay, so I don't want to spend too much time on this. This is, so what I'm really saying is that by identifying x with y, I've not changed the underlying topology. I'm still working with the Zariski topology. So we can identify x with y, not just as sets, because that's not good enough. You can't just say that x and y are bijective, so I can identify. I mean, that's the starting point, but x comes equipped with a certain topology. And in fact, as we, I mean, in future, I'll talk about functions and so on. It comes with certain functions on it. Along with that additional structure also, x and y can be identified. So this way, you can consider x as an affine variety. Because y is an affine variety. Y is a algebraic subset of A2. And x and y are, for all practical purposes, the same. So A1 minus 0 has the structure. So this is the kind of sentence I'll make. A1 minus 0 has the structure of an algebraic variety. Okay, this is not that interesting by itself, but I'll give you one interesting example. So before that, I will, to show that this is not trivialities that I'm talking about, I mean, this is something that I cannot discuss in these lectures, but if you increase n does not have a structure of an affine variety for n bigger than or equal to 2. Okay, so what happens for 1 doesn't happen for 2 and so on. So there is, I mean, it's not that everything can be made in affine variety, made into an affine variety. That's not true. Okay, and so the main example, actually, I wanted to do this baby case because I want to introduce this important example that is relevant for, I think, future lectures, is the following. So first I want to take this. So take n by n matrices over complex numbers. So of course, this is a set which has no structure till now at this point, but I can identify with Cn square. Let us once and for all fix a way of given a matrix. There are n squared entries, so we can flatten them out and think of it as a tuple of complex numbers. We can, for example, take the first row followed by second row followed by third row. So the matrix can be sent to an n squared tuple, right? This is an n by n matrix, can be sent to an n squared tuple. So, and of course, this is a bijective map. It's only a bijective map. I mean, this is a set only. So M and C can be identified with Cn square. So with this identification, M and C is an affine space. M and C is actually no different from the affine space Cn square. It is just that we agree to keep track of all the elements in a different way. Instead of writing them as one tuple, we'll write them as a matrix. So that itself is not interesting. It is just affine space. What is interesting is subsets of M and C. Now consider GL and C inside M and C. So GL and C, of course, is all. So this is an important group in what comes later, representation theory and other things, other lectures. But it's also actually an important variety, is what I want to illustrate to you. In fact, it is an affine variety, but not on the face of it, not with this inclusion. Why is that? So this I just told you is actually an affine space. So think of M and C, that means all n by n matrices has the affine space of dimension n square. So this AN, I have not intentionally talked about dimension, but AN has dimension n. Is GL and C a closed subset of Cn square? It is not, right? So we want to make if possible, we want to think of GL and C as an affine variety. That means it must be a closed subset of an affine space. But of M and C itself, it is not a closed subset. This is very similar to the situation of the previous problem. A1 minus 0 is an open subset of A1. So, but C and C is in fact an open subset of. Right? The invertible matrices form an open subset. So this is not a closed subset of the affine space. So we don't lose hope, right? We can. But GL and C can be embedded inside Cn square plus 1. Okay, where you take A and you just arrange the n square elements entries in some way, and the last entry is I think determinant of A inverse. Because determinant of A is non-zero, we can put this, we can take its inverse, and that I'll stick it at the last n square plus 1th coordinate. So then the image is a closed subset, just like in the previous example. So it is an algebraic, it is an affine variety for our purpose. It is also actually irreducible, but I don't want to get into that. So it is an affine variety. Hence, So is GLNC. So this is how we think of GLNC as an affine variety. And this is an important affine variety for the purposes of the future classes. So hence, similarly, SL and C, which is all matrices which have determinant 1, is also an affine variety. You can think of it as a closed subset of GL and C. Okay, so this is an affine variety. So these are one final example, because this is something that was mentioned earlier and also will be repeatedly mentioned. So the symmetric algebra associated to vector space. So I don't want to formally define this. I think this description is actually useful for us. These are all homogeneous polynomials in n variables. Of course, homogeneous polynomials are the complex numbers of degree, homogeneous polynomials of degree d. So I will spend more time on this in my next talk, and I'm sure this comes up a lot. So this is actually, because these are homogeneous polynomials of degree d, this is a vector space that is spanned by all monomials of degree d, and that can be identified with an affine space, I believe, with this dimension, n plus d minus 1 choose d. So this can be identified with an affine space. And from what I understand, a lot of varieties that are of interest in this subject are actually coming from certain group operations or certain morphisms and end up being inside this affine space. Okay, so maybe I'll try to give some examples in the next lecture. But for now, I wanted to highlight the fact that this can be thought of as an affine space. Okay. Okay, so I have 5 minutes left. So I took all of the lecture mostly to discuss affine varieties. So I will just start with this. So are there any questions? I mean, before, of course, you can ask questions in 5 minutes. So maybe I'll just use the 5 minutes remaining to quickly talk about projective varieties. This will not take a full class because we have done all the hard work of understanding what affine varieties are. So this is just one additional feature that we have to keep track of. So here, affine varieties, the ambient space is the affine space AN. So that is where all the action took place. So similarly for projective varieties, the ambient space where all the action takes place is called projective N space. Similar to affine N space, and this is denoted by Pn. So that is the notation, projective Pn. So maybe I'll just spend 4 more minutes to give you what the set Pn is. It is, so first you look at Cn plus 1 and you remove the origin from this. So you look at n plus 1 dimensional affine space and remove the origin, and in the following equivalence relation. So on this set, what is the equivalence relation? So I'm going to use the indices like A0 to AN. That would be n plus 1 of them. So I'll say A0 to AN is similar to B0 to Bn if there exists a non-zero complex number lambda such that each Bi is precisely lambda times Ai. So I'm identifying points which are scalar multiples of each other. Geometrically, what I'm doing is I'm taking a line through the origin and identifying all the points on that line. So that is the equivalence relation. So then Pn is precisely the set of equivalence classes of this. So this is Cn plus 1 minus 0 modulo this equivalence relation. So what I'm really doing is, this is nothing but set of lines through the origin right? So you look at Cn plus 1, look at lines to the origin, and for each line, you take a point in Pn. Each line represents a point. This line represents a point, this line represents a point. So this is my ambient space. A point in Pn is simply a line in Cn plus 1 passing through the origin. So therefore, a point in Pn is a line in Cn plus 1 through the origin. Okay, and it can be represented as, it will have of course lots of representatives. So the standard notation is this. So inside P2, for example, you will have one element. So one thing you have to keep in mind is Pn has n plus 1 coordinates. So P2 has something like this, but that is same as I times 2i, I mean I being complex number. So you have to be careful when working with points of projective space, because there are lots of representatives. So any operation you want to perform, you want to ensure that that is well behaved with respect to various representatives of that point. So starting with the notion of what is zero of a polynomial is. Okay, so we want to view, so we want to think of points of Pn as zeros of polynomials. So of course, because points in Pn have n plus 1 coordinates, we want to think of polynomials in n plus 1 variables also. So points have n plus 1 coordinates. So we want to look at polynomials in n plus 1 variables. But you quickly run into problems. So for example, if you take x0 square plus x1 as a polynomial, and you take the point 1, 2 in P1, there is no meaningful way that you can evaluate, right? So if you evaluate with 1, 2, you get 1 plus 2, 3. But this should equal 2, 4. Because 1, 2 is same as 2, 4. But this gives me 2 square plus, so 4 plus 4, this gives me 8. And clearly 3 and 8 are different as complex numbers. So you have to be careful with the notion of evaluating polynomials. You have to be careful about what it means to consider zeros of a polynomial. So let me stop here. I've already taken 2 extra minutes. So what I will do next time is to, I don't know if this will be required in the next 1 or 2 lectures, but when I come back, I will try to describe what are the correct polynomials to look at. You have to look at homogeneous polynomials. Okay, then this makes sense. Even then, only the notion of whether something vanishes or not is well defined, not the value of that polynomial. Okay, so we will discuss that and then develop the whole theory along the same lines as affine varieties. We'll want to define eventually what is called a projective variety. Okay, so let me stop here. I'll be happy to answer if you have any questions.
Hi,